Let's bring in our company, Politico reporter Patrick Gavin, former domestic policy advisor to President Clinton, Jami Floyd, and Princella Smith, GOP strategist and founder of ChooseYourChairman.com. All right, now, we have to understand that it's not out of the ordinary for justices to give speeches. They do that. But then there are a couple of major questions here. And Jami, let me ask you the first one. Does this create a conflict, or at least the appearance of a conflict of interest? I know you've vetted Supreme Court nominees before. Is there a problem? Not only is Michelle Bachmann sponsoring this talk, but she's on one of the briefs arguing against the health care law.
And I think we all agree, and we should probably put this on the table, that this health care law will end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. We have judges from different circuits disagreeing, which gets you to the U.S. Supreme Court probably on a fast track.
And a lot of Americans who care about this, noting the fact that the two judges that sided with the Obama administration are Democratic appointees.
And the one who didn't
is a Bush appointee.
And we have a question of congressional authority. So all of that gets us to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Scalia likely to be sitting there when it gets there. So that's the question of controversy, the question you raise, whether there's a conflict of interest. That being said, as you point out, Supreme Court justices speak all the time. I've heard Scalia speak on many occasions. In fact, I know the man, and even though I disagree with him jurisprudentially on almost everything more than any other justice, with the exception of possibly Clarence Thomas, I've never seen him cross the line. He's very careful when he speaks not to cross the line into anything he's going to pass judgment on. And this speech will focus strictly on the separation of powers. It is not about the health care legislation.
All right, aside from the speech, Princella, second question, because this is behind closed doors, how would we know if lawmakers could improperly, for example, attempt to lobby Scalia about issues before the court? Are we supposed to trust that that's not going to happen?
Well, you know, that's exactly the point that I was going to bring up, Chris, is that that's more of a concern than anything else. Obviously, Supreme Court justices have the right to speak to whatever groups that they want to speak to. And it should be noted here, I don't know if it's been said yet, but this is open to congressional members of both sides of the aisle. So both Democrats and Republicans are welcome to attend this event. And yes, you're exactly right. I mean, I think that the bigger issue is making sure that no one is lobbying Justice Scalia for what appears to be a pretty big future battle about the health care law. So that is the more important question of the whole deal. And it does seem, Patrick, like back in the day, Supreme Court justices weren't out there the way they are now. You also have a situation with Ginny Thomas, the wife of Clarence Thomas, where she has this Tea Party affiliated group, has raised money for them, questions being raised about we don't know where that money is coming from. Is this, with all the fundraising and with the Supreme Court justices being more likely to go out, are we in a whole new area here?
Yeah, I mean, I think what sort of bothers me is, I mean, let's assume that none of this is unethical, technically, that it does sort of fit in that box. The reality, though, is that the Supreme Court is one of the few institutions that still enjoys a sort of a high public approval rating. It's sort of held as this esteemed paragon of virtue. And stories like this, stories like Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas, you have sort of every year this debate about whether or not Supreme Court justices go to the State of the Union, how they behave at the State of the Union. I mean, all these stories that create this idea in the public's mind that we are now politicizing the Supreme Court, even if it is completely legal and completely ethical, is going to slowly, I think, chip away at really one of the only institutions that the public still reveres. And that, I think, is the one thing to worry about.
And I have to say, shortly on the heels of the anniversary of Bush v. Gore, which was last weekend, the court has to be very careful about that. And the court has enjoyed over the years, and then at some periods it's had dips in the enjoyment of its legitimacy. Right. And I personally, as a lawyer and a political analyst, think maybe justices shouldn't speak. Maybe they shouldn't write books. I think this court has been very careful, and I'd say Scalia is among them, not to erode their legitimacy. But personally, if I were a Supreme Court justice, and I never will be, but I wouldn't go on a speaking tour.
Yeah, the appearance of conflict is another question. Jami, Princella, Patrick, thanks to all of you. Patrick, Jami, and Princella are back with us. And, there are, as always happens in cases like this, questions being raised, Princella, about shouldn't somebody have seen something? Somebody should have known something. He obviously was someone who was troubled. Sadly, I don't know. There are a lot of troubled people out there, and you just don't always see this coming.
Yeah, Chris, that's exactly right. I mean, this is, the country, quite frankly, we're on hard times, and everybody just can't deal. Clearly, the man had mental issues. I think there's something to be said. I'm not an attorney, but something happened here. There's a disconnect between letting this man off probation or even letting him out of jail without some sort of assurance that he's going to be in some kind of mental counseling. I will say this. My father served on the school board for 20 years, and in most towns, school board meetings are open to the public. But I have always expressed and had a concern that these meetings are open, usually with no security. Usually people it's kind of a go along to get along, and no one expects that these things happen. But really, there have been several violent incidences, maybe not to this degree, but of people who just get out of control at these public forums. So I really urge many of these small towns who just think, everything's fine, we do this every day. You really probably need to get some security there, because you just never know who's coming to these meetings.
And obviously we're waiting for the security guard in this case to come out. A lot of people saying he's a hero. He went right in there.
He is.
But the other thing, Jamie and Patrick, that struck me as I watched all of this unfolding is, here you have a superintendent who's trying to talk to the guy. He says, keep me, let the other people go. You have a woman who is let go. She comes back with a purse, tries to knock the gun out of his hand.
Ginger Littleton.
Ginger, yeah. I talked to her yesterday, and she said it probably wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done, because when he knocked her down, he put the gun to her head. But it never ceases to amaze me, the bravery.
Yeah.
And she did it because her friends were sitting there and she thought they were in danger. She couldn't leave them there. The bravery and the calm of people under the most extraordinarily stressful situations.
No, I mean, I watched that video and I thought the first thing I would have done was just duck under the desk.
Yeah.
And these guys, which they easily could have done.
They're trying to talk him down.
I mean, they're trying to talk him down. I think what's interesting is the Facebook angle of this. I mean, I'm from D.C. and we had an incident recently where a guy threatened to attack our metro system, and I think he was largely, the authorities were largely alerted by something he'd posted on Facebook. That's great. I think it's also it's going to present some interesting situations down the road, because everybody talks on Facebook and says things either crazy or not crazy, and it's going to be very hard to separate something like this from just a guy who's just venting after he saw a movie. So, I mean, Facebook is a great resource in that regard, but how are we going to separate just a guy who had a bad day from stuff like this?
Yeah, especially if the shooter survives and it heads to trial. What is fascinating, as you point out, in every single one of these mass shooting cases, you have these incredible heroes like Mr. Jones, who we'll hear from shortly, like Ginger Littleton, who I saw your interview, amazing courage. They say, oh, I wasn't being courageous, I was just thinking of my friends, but these are American heroes in every single one of these stories. But we have too many of these stories. It's not just Florida. This is a nationwide epidemic, and this man had an aggravating stalking conviction, a criminal record, a history of mental illness. If it doesn't rise to insanity in a court of law, he certainly had a mental illness, and yet he had firearms. He had an extra magazine, and there he was firing at other American citizens who were unprotected. That's a problem. I know we have a right to bear arms, but we have to find a way to keep them out of the hands of those who are mentally unstable.
All right, Jamie, Patrick, Princella, thanks.